Nothing had been done like this before.
What we were dealing with here was something which was anti-television, anti-corporation, was anti-everything that fed us, basically.
I absolutely loved this idea of the Max Headroom show.
The character was essentially a creature thumbing his nose at the world he inhabited.
There was a great deal of potential there, and I was excited.
It was unique what we were trying to do at the time, and we knew it.
It was not only magical, it was life-changing.
Channel 4, which was a brand new TV station, needed programming. They desperately needed programming, but they didn't really have budgets.
A commissioning editor from Channel 4 called Andy Park wanted a music video series.
They wanted to take all this free material and repackage it.
At that time, music videos were more like short films. So it didn't really seem like cheap programming. It actually seemed like quite high, production values programming, but they needed stuff to sort of link them.
MTV, of course, was all the rage way back then, and I knew Andy as a good friend, and we had a music video competition. He was one of the judges, and at the end of it, he said, "Can you develop me a show?" At the time, there were two incredibly talented animators called Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel at Cucumber, who were really doing innovative animation.
We produced music videos and TV commercials.
We were sort of like the place to go to for very cutting-edge, cool sort of graphics and animation that was just at that very early stage of MTV.
Chrysalis Television came to us and said, you do all these kind of trendy, groundbreaking videos and stuff. Why don't you try and come up with an idea?
And said, could we please link these music videos into something that would actually be a 12 or 13-part TV series?
The challenge from my perspective was, A, just simply pragmatic, trying to acquire rights to music videos. And the second one for me was that the tradition was to have VJs, video jocks, that were just talking heads that linked the promos together.
We were struggling with linking these things with graphics, and we had all sorts of designs and things. And so Peter Wagg put us together with a brilliant writer, George Stone.
I was a writer. I worked commercially in advertising, and I also wrote science fiction for publication in small magazines.
He was the kind of guy that would come up with 10 ideas, and of every 10 ideas, 9 would be totally off the wall, but he'd always have one that was really better than anybody else would come up with. So I figured I'd roll the dice and asked George if he would join the team.
George and Rocky and I completely hit it off.
We kind of gelled intellectually, which was very useful.
We would just brainstorm and knock ideas around.
We were interested in the same things. I remember lots of quantum discussions.
He came up with this name for the TV show called the Max Headroom show.
Max Headroom was over the entranceway of every car park in the UK. Instant branding, instant recognition.
It was a brilliant name because it meant anything could happen. The world is your oyster, the universe is infinite, it's maximum headroom.
And that's how the initial nucleus of the group started.
At that point, we didn't think of it as a character. There was no character or anything, it was just the name of the show.
It took about 18 months, 2 years, to get to the notion of Network 23, of Blipverts, of a future world.
Everybody likes a pitch line. Everybody likes a line where you can try and encapsulate in a very simple sentence what the project is. And obviously I had to go to Andy Park at Channel 4 at some point and pitch him what it was that he'd asked me to come up with.
It occurred to us once we'd actually, just about explored every possible route for linking these music videos, that the way to go was conventional, which was with the talking head.
We have a guy, a very kind of staid-looking guy with a collar and a tie, and he's just interviewing this wild and wacky filmmaking.
We had been to America a few times, and it had really captivated us about the way that television was entirely different to British television. What was so compelling was the talking head. We were completely bemused how there were always, if there was a camera angle here and there was a camera angle there, and the talking head would go from here to there, back again. It was so established part of American television that it really sort of went into our subconscious.
Chrysalis specifically didn't want any human beings involved in the show. They wanted it to be purely graphics.
Why do we need a human being? Why don't we create a composite human being that is mid-Atlantic, a cross between Johnny Carson, or in England we had a guy called Terry Wogan, and meld all these personalities together into one character?
It had to have a talking head with a difference, and it had to be as compelling as the music videos were that we were linking.
Because they wanted it graphic and not a real human being, the way we incorporate what they want and what we want to do is to have the boring TV presenter, but make him a graphic interpretation of himself and make him computer generated, and he would be the world's first computer generated TV presenter.
And so that was the origin.
On my next little visit to Channel 4 on Charlotte Street, I said to Andy, right, we've got a name for this show. It's called Max Headroom. He said, but who is he? Why is he presenting a television show? Where did he come from? So clearly, we had to really do a lot of backstory.
George, Rocky and I would spend a lot of time just hashing through all sorts of various ideas.
We had to figure out a rational way of creating a seemingly computer-generated character.
The initial idea was it was this guy, and he was like a Johnny Carson type character, and he was late for his show. It was set in the future, and he was the most popular star in the world, and he had an accident on his way to the studio, and the last thing he saw was the Max Headroom barrier that came down the parking lot. And he was so popular that the only way that they could keep the ratings going was to quickly revamp him as a computer-generated avatar of himself, which they did, and they put him on TV, but they did it in such a rushed way that there were all these kind of artifacts, and he had the stuttering and things like that.
Initially, the story was to be told in 5-minute chunks with cliffhanger endings, almost like a Saturday morning serial, the short one-reelers.
So as crazy as it sounds now, we thought this was really great, and we were like really into it.
We wanted very much to have this sort of Jekyll and Hyde personality, you know, Edison Carter and Max Headroom. And if he was a Johnny Carson type character, it just seemed to be too... He was already like an entertainer, and he's already halfway to being Max Headroom. We wanted the alter ego of Max Headroom, if you like, to be a man of integrity. So then we had to switch it from something other than it being a TV host, and then we thought a TV journalist, a serious journalist. It seemed to fit better.
And George got to work on thinking about who is the character that is behind Max Headroom, and he came up with Edison Carter, the investigative journalist. Of course, all live-action hero characters have to have their female accomplice, and it had to be somebody super smart and very beautiful, and that was the Theora Jones character. And bit by bit, the story started to evolve.
Up came the whole notion of Network 23, up came the whole notion of the crash barrier, and we suddenly had a backstory.
Within a few months, we had something significant enough to be able to go back to Channel 4 and Andy Park.
And they loved it. They thought this was a great idea. But they didn't have enough money to actually produce it. But they wanted to kick off the TV series with like an hour-long film that explains his origin. And then the following week, we go into him having his own video show where he introduces the music videos.
So as the guys carried on working, I had to go find the money.
Andy Park, you know, quite smartly said, well, why don't you take Rocky and Annabelle's showreel, which was all these music videos we'd done and interesting commercials, and the treatment that we'd written, and go to Hollywood and try and get the money to make this film, and we'd do a co-production or something.
So I end up at HBO in New York because everybody's looking for an MTV-style show.
And HBO said, don't go to Hollywood, stay in your hotel room, and we'll get back to you in 24 hours. And they did, and they said, okay, that's it, we'll make the 1 hour film if we can show it on HBO in America. And that was the deal, and they gave us the money.
And it was a perfect scenario because HBO were in New York, we'd be shooting it all in England, and Channel 4 never bothered you, so I didn't have any clients to worry about. So I had lunch with Terry Ellis, the co-founder of the company, and he said, how's it going? I said, it's going great, Terry. We've got HBO, we've got Channel 4, and it doesn't sound a lot now. I said, but I'm $180,000 short of what I need. He said, well, why do you need it? I said, well, it's really important that we have our little video cams, our steady cams, we're in the elevators with a grainy look, and then we're shooting, I really want to shoot 35mm, not 16mm. And when I put all the ingredients together to do it the way that we really should do it, that's my shortfall. And he said, go do it. All of a sudden now we have 3 backers who are trusting us to deliver what we've promised and sold. The challenge then became that good old George, God bless him, I could never get a script.
When we'd thrashed out the story and we had all the characters in place, we hadn't really gotten it to a place where it was ready to be produced.
We were getting to the point where unless we started to deliver something, we were just going to lose the whole project.
It needed to be formatted and the storyline needed to be controlled.
The hardest part of the whole project was realizing that I had to bring a writer in and to get somebody who could write me a script.
There were a lot of ideas that needed to sort of be wrangled.
I saw so many writers, big name writers, film writers, television writers, all sorts of writers, and I couldn't get an instinctive gut vibe. So I was speaking to one agent one day and she said to me, well, I've no idea what you're talking about, and I have a client and I have no idea what he talks about, so on the basis I don't understand either of you, perhaps you should meet. Enter Steve Roberts, better known to us lot as Barracuda, and in English tradition we spent the evening in the pub.
I hated him on sight. He was a suit, and he looked like a suit, and he behaved like a suit. But within 2 pints we locked, because this idea that he was talking about, which was very unformed, fascinated me immediately.
And by the end of the night we were firm friends and he was on board.
So we got together, we talked about it. I met Rocky and Annabelle. We all got along very well. And we decided we've got to break the story.
Basically, we used the 2 reference points. We used Blade Runner as the visualization of a world and a look. And then we talked network as the message, the content of the project that was all about media manipulation and manipulating ratings and the TV world.
We'd work day and night on this thing, and I would take copious notes. And for a week we tried to break the story. We also met up with Colin Wilson, the writer, whose son suggested that Bryce should be a 13 or 14-year-old. So the origin of Max comes from all sorts of different places. My job was to put the whole lot together and try and make it coherent.
Steve took all of this, and with his offbeat sensibility as well, he crafted us a script that I could actually take to Channel 4 and say, we have a script and we can shoot this.
So I was sent off to my little waterside village in Essex with 20 days, I think, and I just wrote it, sent a few pages in. They went, great, this is the sort of thing we're looking for. And I just kept going, basically, pub, work, pub, work.
We got the money from America to make the film, and now it was rushed into production. We had a few weeks to get it all together.
I started to assemble a team of writers for Max Dialogue, and 2 writers, Paul Owen and David Hansen, suddenly started emerging from the pack. Paul and David really started to try and develop the character of Max, not Edison and that whole Network 23 and 20 Minutes in the Future side, but who is Max's whole persona. But I knew I needed a parallel going on here, because now we'd gone from a simple 13.5-hour music video show to a whole backstory in a Blade Runner-esque world, which was a movie. So they started working on ideas, whilst Rocky and Annabelle were working on ideas, while Steve was writing the film script, and while the other team were writing on the Max Dialogue script. And we started a casting process.
Well, the casting process was wonderful, actually. It was a great process.
Now, it's always difficult in a casting process if you don't have a script, because the talent enters the room and they expect some sides to read to give you an idea. So I had the Max writers just write a bunch of gags, basically.
Max was always going to be American. In Britain, we tend to be apologetic. We don't like people who shout. In America, you can shout and not be rude. You can use a loud voice, and you can address the audience directly, which is a very appealing notion. If Max had been English, he would not have been the synthesis of television. He could not have been a million voices. He could not be a televangelist, a sports reporter, a news reporter.
We couldn't afford to cast in America. So Matt happened to be living in London, and so he kind of, was one of the very few Americans or Canadians that came in.
And I can only speak for myself, but for the minute he walked in, I knew he was the guy. He looked like an animated character to me. He had this square jaw, he had this big forehead, he was angular, and he looked like an animated character.
When we saw him and we looked at the Polaroids afterwards, it was a complete slam dunk. I mean, it was quite obvious. He just absolutely owned Max Headroom from the get-go.
We were struck by just the way he looked, with the blue eyes and this kind of Aryan kind of look, this master race kind of vibe that he had. And that to us seemed to be where everything was going, with media control and the fact that media is becoming as powerful as politics. It just seemed that maybe in the future, our politicians will be computer generated. And when we saw him, it all seemed to fit into place.
He had the humour, he had the wit, he was as sharp as anything.
He invaded the character. I mean, he completely got him, understood him, and was able to riff and improvise on the acerbic quality that Max had.
He started ad-libbing some of these jokes.
We had writers, and that formed the spine of what Max would say, but Matt improvised and worked it, essentially treated it like a stand-up.
The idea of Theora Jones was to be kind of Edison Carter's sidekick and the love interest, so she had to be incredibly smart and incredibly beautiful at the same time.
Obviously, Amanda walked in and we all just fell in love with her, and she just got the part.
When Amanda came in, it was just so obvious that she was so smart. Her voice was so perfect because, of course, it had to be something that would translate over the airwaves to Edison, when she's guiding him through the building and everything. So voice was very important. She had a great voice. She had a beautiful face. She was absolutely the perfect person to play the role.
Blank Reg was entirely George Stone's invention. He came up with this idea of a character that could kind of usurp the system, and the only way he could do that was by calling himself Blank, because when he typed it into a computer, it was just blank, and then he was outside of the system.
Blank Reg is a nod in the direction of punk, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, etc., which took the old forms of dinosaur music and literally kicked it to death. Blank Reg is named after my Uncle Reg, who I hadn't seen for some time, and therefore he was blank in that instance.
When Morgan came in and started to work with the character, it became really, really fun.
Blank Reg would be like a 60-year-old punk, but he still has the aesthetic, the haircut and everything. And Morgan really understood that. He was this kind of punk type character,
He was a fantastic actor and brought Blank Reg to life.
To see, the power of how an actor can take the written word and bring it to life and make it so funny. I'd be on the set and I'd be so convulsed in laughing, tears streaming down my cheeks, that I have to leave the set and have to go and walk around the studio to try and calm down from stopping laughing. And then I come back onto the set, and as soon as I saw the actor's face, I'd just start laughing again. And I'd just disrupt the whole production. I had to really control myself.
So we had all these different moving parts going along in parallel.
We created this futuristic world, and it was incredibly detailed.
We had the most perfect location to be able to go and shoot it.
We shot it at Beckton Gas Works, which was where they shot Full Metal Jacket. And it had a very dystopian, bleak kind of look because it was a Victorian gasworks that was half dismantled. I think the project had stopped because it was very toxic and they'd only allow film crews in there.
The actual production design was something that was very important to us, and it was very exciting. And all the different elements, there was always something that was going on in the frame that needed a lot of designing and attention. That involved the lighting and the props, the art direction, the colour.
We wanted to make it gritty and kind of born out of our world.
Well, the aesthetic for the whole film was very much part of that era.
The look of the film came out of the look of a lot of the music videos and the aesthetic at that time.
Brazil, Blade Runner.
There were a lot of these sort of dystopian kind of grungy, I guess, looking films around at the time.
It was like, this is what we're heading for if we don't watch out.
The idea was for it to be a kind of a retro future, was a future that we could recognise.
We were very fascinated by that. And so, it was very convenient as well, because it was a cheap way of taking an existing prop and plonking things and adding and distorting and ending up with something that was, seemed to belong to that world entirely.
That was our vision of the future. It just seemed, when we were writing it, it just seemed as though that was the possible future.
So we started off with this kind of maverick approach.
It was the media world gone mad. The advertising and television had taken over our world and had such an influence on politics and the structure of our lives that it had changed it completely.
Max was always a very political, anarchic, satirical character that wanted to comment on the world around him. We wanted to hold up a mirror, really, to the right wing. And so the only way to do that was to make fun of the right wing through Max Headroom being the arch-conservative Republican.
Our vision was to have a Stephen Colbert type of show for Max Headroom.
The complete diametric opposite to Edison Carter, who was, gung-ho, right on, investigative journalist, let's get it all out in the open, liberal, left-wing. And so the two characters, the Jekyll and Hyde, the opposites, were what made the whole.
So then, of course, we still have to address the somewhat vital question of what Max looks like.
I was on the set with green screens of all the TVs that were everywhere with Max Headroom, and all the actors were playing to an empty screen, and everybody was saying, well, what does he look like?
Once we decided it was going to be a computer-generated head, we were exploring different methods of actually creating this character.
Well, originally I thought it was going to be flat 2D animation, because we tried to budget it out for real CGI and it wasn't possible at the time.
As part of the process, Peter Lytton and John Humphreys came on board, who had done some fabulous prosthetic work. So we were really experimenting between animation, prosthetics, all sorts of different disciplines to see how this whole thing was going to come into being.
The only way to create this computer-generated character was with sleight of hand, was to treat it like a visual effect. And so the best way to do that was probably with prosthetics.
Peter and John would come up with sketches and drawings and all this. And at one point I said, well, all you've got to do is just accentuate what he already is, because he's it.
And that's when we sculpted the head. We took a mould of his head and we rebuilt it, and then we laid on flat surfaces and made it look as if a computer had generated it with a plastic suit, a plastic collar and tie. And then we retrofitted that all back onto Matt, and then he became the computer-generated character.
It was a matter of mimicking what was early CG. They have one light source, and, it becomes very high contrast. All the surfaces at that time were very shiny, or they were very matte. There was not much subtlety going on. They hadn't gotten into all the various shading programs and things.
But he became this angular character that was just perfect.
You had the combination of the prosthetics and the lighting, the editing technique of making it look like animation, and add in the background, and all of a sudden, you've got so many different elements adding up, different layers, that it is an artificial sleight of hand.
Everybody believed it really was a computer animated character.
It was just very convenient that we had the animation skills to be able to interpret a live action image in a way that would be convincing as a computer generated image. Once we'd done the film, there were a few things that were left out that we didn't have at the time to be able to shoot when we were in production. One of them was Max Headroom, which we dealt with later. What wasn't taken care of was, what is this zigzag commercial? I mean, oh my God, what is it that makes people explode?
It was never actually in the script that you actually see the Blipfert. So that line item never got budgeted.
And at the time, we had a half-frame camera, stills camera.
I got the guy from the Chinese restaurant round the corner who wasn't a member of Equity or anything, and I pulled him into the studio.
And we made him up, and we gave him a bunch of various objects that we couldn't even afford, like interesting, expensive objects. So it was just whatever found objects around the studio.
We got cans of Coca-Cola and painted them with the zigzag logo and exercise shoes or whatever. And we got him to hold up these products, and I shot him in a single frames, but from all angles.
So automatically, if you run 35mm through this half-frame camera, you got the shutter line going through.
And of course, it was just a barrage of this guy, this Asian guy, kind of holding up these products and this, and that was it, because we had no money.
We were sort of rather pleased with that, because we'd created a 30-second TV commercial, and we know how much TV commercials cost, for about £5. When we finally actually premiered it, such as the premiere was, which was a showing in Channel 4, the response was astounding.
The impact in television land and in the UK was unbelievable.
We'd been so inside of Max Headroom and our world that we'd created, and we were so consumed with it that we hadn't really sort of stepped back far enough to actually realise that there was something really, quite significant going on.
We ran the movie on the Thursday, and then the half-hour shows started on the Saturday, the 6th. So Max suddenly comes on from all this hash, and he's talking German, laughing his head off, telling a joke about Lederhausen that nobody could understand, and then we went into a German music video. And we came out of the music video, and Max said, and this week's award to the worst television spot of the week goes to, and we cut to commercials. At the end of the half hour, it just went again. No credits, no nothing. And, it was just extraordinary, And then that ultimately evolved into a variety show where we had variety acts and we had other guest artists on there. We had Tina Turner, we had all sorts of people. So that had a life of its own.
It became this huge phenomenon. It became so popular so fast, and everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon.
An advertising agency called BBDO, the London office had been watching this on television, and they sent a videotape to their New York office and said, you guys should see this, it's fantastic. BBDO New York had a problem. It was called New Coke. It had been launched and was dying. They were desperate. And the guy that got the tape was moving agencies, so he just kept the tape, moved to the new agency who handled Coke, and suggested Max to be the spokesperson for New Coke. And I just thought, life is never going to be the same ever again. My agent was at William Morris, and they're telling me, we can sell this, we can sell this, we can sell this. So I went to the 3 networks at the time. CBS offered me a movie of the week, NBC passed, and I met Stu Bloomberg at ABC.
Stu Bloomberg, who was then the development head of ABC, happened to be in London the night this transmitted. He'd never heard of it, and he was in his hotel room when he saw it, and he made the phone call.
He got it, he's an intellectual, he saw all the different levels and layers and the alter egos of 2 different characters and polarized opposites, and he saw all the depth in it, and of course, it tickled his whole sense of humour that the whole premise was to satire his job and his company. So I decided to go with ABC. When we came to America, there were certain immovables. One was Matt, of course. One was Amanda. I had to have Morgan Shepherd because I couldn't imagine anybody who could play Blank Reg like he did. Paul and David to write the dialogue.
Annabelle and myself and George Stone kind of got left behind. It made us kind of angry, really, that our creation was just, spiraling out of control. And they were talking about this TV series in America, and nobody had talked to us or mentioned it to us, and we were the creative team behind it.
ABC were in third place. They were desperate to try and show to the creative world in Hollywood that they should come to ABC with their ideas. So just like New Coke was dying, they were desperate. ABC was too. But I'd never produced an American network show. I didn't have a track record.
He was having problems with the network because he was used to doing things his way. The English tradition is hire a producer, hire a director, hire a writer, go. Whereas here the whole thing has to be very, very carefully nurtured.
I knew that I couldn't get away with it on my own, and my agent also represented a guy called Phil DeGuer. And Phil had created Simon Simon, extremely successful. He'd ran the Twilight Zone series, and so there was a little bit of a screw loose with Phil as well, which I kind of liked.
Phil's job was to nurture. Well, Phil, God rest his soul, was as crazy as the rest of us.
The conversation was raised about the need to have a partner on the first run of 6 shows who had the track record, who was a proven showrunner. So Phil and I ultimately had a heart-to-heart, and Phil, who became the Reverend, like I became Breakthrough and Steve became Barracuda, and Phil said to me, he said, look, it's your show, you run it. If I think you're doing something wrong, I'll try and persuade you not to do it, but I'll always defer to you when it comes to the crunch. Phil was just amazing. He brought a whole bunch of people to the project that I would never have found, like Michael Cassett.
We were all working in some degree on Twilight Zone when they pulled the plug on Twilight Zone. Phil gathered us all together as we were about to be cut loose and said, are any of you interested in this thing, Max Headroom? And he showed us the British TV movie, 20 Minutes into the Future. And several of us, like George Martin and I, just said, what do we have to pay to do it?
The only problem that happened then was he brought a writer on to adapt the English pilot into the pilot script for America. After about 3 drafts of this, I said, Phil, this isn't going to work. He just doesn't get it. And I called Barracuda up and said, Barracuda, I need you.
I got a phone call from Mag saying, can you get in a plane, come over for the weekend, rewrite this rewrite, it's a bloody disaster.
He said, how long do you need me for? I said, 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe. And he literally arrived the next day with a little carry-on.
And that was 20 odd years ago, and I've not been back since.
Between Phil DeGuer and Barracuda, we got the pilot script that was perfect. And then with some of the writers that Phil had brought on, like Michael, we were starting to develop scripts.
He called me after a day or two and said, if you can stay on another day or two, because there's a big meeting Thursday. And he said, they want to see that we can do something else. So I said, okay, well, what do they want? He said, oh, no, they just want another one. So on Monday morning, I started work, and on Wednesday evening presented another one. This was underpants in a hotel, bottle of wine, and just going with sandwiches. And so on Thursday, I awaited the phone call, and the phone call was, well, they want to do a whole series. Can you stay on? Well, I said, oh, I suppose so. Was the other one all right? He said, yeah, but they were a bit stunned. I said, why? They didn't like the idea. Because it was the idea of war, this particular one, I think, war as entertainment. And he said, no, what they wanted was a 3-paragraph, 1-pager, and we delivered a 55-page script. They couldn't bloody believe it.
So here we are. I'm at Lorimar. I've got a wonderful client. I've now got my Reverend, who's going to be my guide and mentor. I've got Barracuda. I've got Matt. I've got Paul and David to write Max's dialogue with Matt. So I have my nucleus of what I believe the essence, heart and integrity is of the actual show. I don't think anybody really, even with all their experience, fully understood what it took to actually produce a show. And we'd been through the mill, and so I knew what it took to do. Eddie Denault, who was head of production at Lorimar, would send me line producers to interview. And eventually I called up Eddie and I said, Eddie, I said, look, when I'm in the trenches, I need a dervish. I need somebody that's really going to kick ass and make things happen. He said, I think you're going to like the next guy.
They sat down with me, and there was an interview, and we spent an hour together or so just talking about the philosophy of making films and where they'd come from and what they were trying to do. And I said, thank you very much. And I was getting ready to leave for Rome because I was being sent over to Rome to do a quick review of a picture called Rent-A-Cop. And I remember I got on the plane, and I used the back of the phone, you slide your credit card through, and I called Eddie Denault and said, Eddie, look, I just want to coordinate what I'm doing here. So how'd I do? Should I be planning space in January? What should I be doing? And Eddie said, well, Brian, I just heard from those guys, and we had a conversation, and I don't think it clicked. I'm not sure it worked for you. And I went, okay, fine, all right. I'll be at the Savoy Hotel in Rome. 2 early mornings later, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone at the Savoy in Rome rings, and I wake it up, and it's Peter Wagg, and he's going, Frankish, I understand Eddie had a conversation with you about it not working, and it did work. Come back. We want to talk to you again. Don't count us out here. Really, we're still terribly interested. And when I got back, we sat down and talked to each other, and they liked the idea.
So, of course, Brian just became the most incredible guy. Basically, after 1 or 2 shows, we became the Three Musketeers. It was Brian, Barracuda, and me.
My job on that show was to realize what everybody else was dreaming and coordinate that.
The production design team, even for the American series, just did an amazing job.
Eddie said, okay, you can open offices just inside the gate there. And I said, okay, fine. It's, when are we opening? Around the 15th of January. And then I pulled out the schedule, and I says, okay, where are the scripts? He says, we've got 2 ready to go with the 3rd one. I took a look at them, and I said, all right, well, how much time have I got to prepare these? He says, you have to be on the air on the 27th of March. And I went, you're kidding me.
It was very expensive to produce. The schedules were horrific.
Nothing's been designed. I mean, we haven't even booked stages. This is halfway through January. And you want this on the air? Okay. So we went up and got around the table, and I says, can I have 2, maybe 3 construction crews? I mean, I need a straight time crew, and I need a swing gang crew, and I may need a graveyard crew. I won't know until you get up with some designs. And I understand Richard Lewis is designing the show, and we need, Richard's fabulous, but he needs some time, he needs to draw something, I mean, we got these concepts from the original show, which are great, but there's a lot of things about the original show that we've been talking about that we want to change. I keep hearing Blade Runner coming out of the other office over here. Blade Runner, right, like Blade Runner, 20 minutes into the future.
The production meetings would go on endlessly because you would have these giant debates over what does a telephone look like 20 minutes into the future.
So I turned to Eddie and I says, look, this is going to cost. And I know you got a license fee, and there's an amortized budget and a show budget. And what can I do? He said, just talk to me. Just do what you have to do. Get us on the air. And so I kind of sat down, screwed my courage to the sticking place, and hired a production manager named Carl Olson. There were 2 ADs. There was Jamie Freitag and Craig West, who'd come on board. We all had a lot of energy. And that's when we kind of all went to work, and everybody just stopped sleeping.
I just took inspiration from the production design itself. I mean, the original team that did the costuming, did the sets, did the hardware, all those things.
Sam Nicholson, who created all those amazing effects.
That look and that feel, the idea of Metroland and the Metro cops on the one hand, and the blanks and big time TV in the bus. I just thought those were so much fun. And so evocative and so compelling as just images that I wanted to simply write stories and try to explore what was there.
Nobody had any idea of what this was. It was not like there was a concept reel to sit with the director and show him. We were shooting the concept at the time.
It was unleashing the individual to go and do what they thought was appropriate. Because people didn't feel there was a mold, there certainly was a feel. But that's as far as it ever went. The future was anybody's guess. So whatever you felt about the future, if you wanted to design it in words or design it physically, you were free to have a go. A lot of it, therefore, was ironic and wry and unusual and odd and amusing.
Newsweek did a story on us, and they had a reporter show up, and she said, what is this like here? And I kind of turned to her and I said, this is so different because form does not follow function here. We were literally making it up. And many times I'd have 3 or 4 cameras going, because someone would get an idea of going, I need a piece of playback for over here next week that's going to work, and I need this over here, and we need to shoot Max, and I've written some new dialogue for him, so I'd open up another stage over here, and we were constantly running back and forth from stage to stage to stage. We never let a camera exist without one of us at least, you know, checking in to make sure that the concept was working.
As soon as you start releasing yourself from the idea of, okay, what's the containment, what's the frame for the picture, you go anywhere.
They were very much into Richard Lewis and going for, you know, the set look, the newsroom look, the look of Network 23, the boardroom, and the technology to really, you know, make things different, new in areas that didn't even exist.
And the other issue, of course, was cost there. We simply technically couldn't do that which we were asking to be done, because in post-production, people working 24 hours shifts, gangs of them, to pull off what now could be done by my daughter on a laptop for free overnight between homeworks.
We were still analog, remember. There was no opportunity to really take and load this into a machine and have visual artists rebuild the world. No, we had to create that.
One of the problems was you had to have a television screen or a computer screen in every scene that Max had to turn up in. How the hell else were you going to get the image there? And this was creatively an enormous problem, because you had to be somewhere where there's you couldn't go outside, basically. Now, look what's happened. Because if we could have had wristwatches that he could have shown up on, iPods, Blackberries, everything that we've now got in our back pockets, Max could be there. Max could now, you see, inhabit the world and allow us to do the one thing that we always wanted to do and never could, which was to allow Edison Carter and Max Headroom, essentially the same man, manifested as two separate entities, to come together and, as it were, explore each other. So you would now have, right at the centre of this show, a man trying to understand himself in a conversation with himself. Fantastic stuff. But we couldn't do it then. We just didn't have the technology to make it possible to introduce such an idea easily into our show.
We needed the Max Headroom app.
Yes. Max was very unusual in many ways. The key thing was it was enormous fun to work on. You never felt, and I don't think any of the writers ever felt, that they should be intimidated by the idea that was Max. Everybody was approachable, everybody loved it, spontaneous ideas always welcome, any time of the day and night. And I think, unless Michael has other views on this, there were almost no egos running around, certainly not at the production level. It seemed to be just a great show where people knew they had something unique, and to serve that was enough. The nicest thing to me was that people like Jeff Tambo and Morgan Shepherd, Morgan in particular was great at this. He'd come into my office, because it was always open doors, you see. He'd come in and go, "Here, I've got this bloody great idea. Can I have a word?" And he'd go, "Yeah, Morgan, sit down." He said, "Go on and drink then." And you'd sit and talk for an hour, and he'd come up with some really terrific idea, you know. And you'd go, "Terrific, Morgan, we put that in." He went, "Oh, yeah, I'd love that. Just keep my character going." Know what I'm saying? And Jeff Tambo was terrific too, you know, this wonderful patrician face, and he'd come in and go, "I've been thinking." And you'd embrace all this. So there was no writer's room, there was no organisation. You had ideas, you talked about the ideas, and you went and did them.
The fun with the network were standards and practices.
The producer and network notes were the source of great delight to me, because I, unfortunately, was the one who had to deal with them.
Basically, you have to supply a script before you shoot it to get their comments, approvals, or things you have to change.
First, they just didn't understand what we were doing. That was extremely clear once we'd got into regular production. Stu Blumberg had always understood everything. He got it. But these guys didn't. And I remember getting all sorts of weird and wonderful notes.
Well, naturally, A, we were always late, and B, I didn't want them to get it until the day before the shoot, so they didn't have enough time to really comb through it. And we put things in the script that we knew that they'd want to take out, because there were things in it we wanted to keep. And they had their priorities of things that just had to change. You can't say that about the Pope, you know. But we got stuff in there that if they'd had more time, so this went on and on and on.
There was one absolute classic moment when one of these guys came through the door, sat down and said, "I need you to attend to these notes because you have paid them no attention." I said, au contraire, we've done everything that we thought was appropriate. He said, well, you haven't done anything. I said, well, it's because you didn't think anything was appropriate. And he said, well, look, there is this issue here. And it was one of those beautiful little moments where we were using the technology of 20 minutes into the future to introduce some rather good ideas. So this particular morning, our heroine gets up, Theora, and flicks on her television. And on it up pops a postcard. And this was the idea that one day we'd be sending mail electronically. And up here came this postcard, and the postcard flipped on screen, and it says, I'm in Alaska, cold nights, hot natives, love Elsie, or whoever the heck it was. This was a postcard by what, of course, ultimately became email. And then something else flipped up, saying what time it was and where she was supposed to go, her day diary on the television. All this, by the way, corner frame, as Theora was doing some other stuff that was plot-centered. And then the final one came up and said, and by the way, your period starts this morning. That's what did it. That was a thermonuclear device planted in the middle of ABC television. They couldn't believe it. And this guy was purple. And I said, I don't understand the problem. And he said, well, don't you realise there may be 11 and 12-year-old girls watching this? And I said, well, wouldn't you expect 11 or 12-year-old girls not to notice that that was anything, but a rather good idea. He decided that all such products should be curtained off in supermarkets. This was the kind of level of mind that we were dealing with. So imagine that sort of thinking applied to story and character issues, let alone events on screen. It was a nightmare. But for us, of course, it was nightly jousting.
When we had the wrap party, we're all there, and there's these three guys at the bar in suits that I just didn't recognise, which is kind of weird because I knew everybody there, you know. And I went up to them and I said, excuse me, my name's Peter Wagg, and I don't know if we've met. And they said, well, we're the Standards and Practices people from ABC. I said, you're kidding me. We never met them, you know. They said, you know, this is the most fun show we've ever worked on. And we know you sent us the scripts at the last minute, and we knew you put this stuff in. I mean, they played the game with us, and they loved it.
I remember being stunned by the heat that was on this concept.
It was a media hit.
What Gary Trudeau did, making Reagan a kind of Max Headroom clone in the Doonesbury cartoons, was fantastic.
We had the front cover of Newsweek.
I remember driving in my little Volkswagen from my house in Van Nuys and stopping at a newsstand, and there was Max on the cover. I was just stunned, and they'd interviewed, you know, Steve and Peter in the cast.
At this point, we got Coca-Cola commercials going out.
Max had already had his Cinemax talk show and things like that.
We'd do these satellite broadcasts from the HBO studios with Max Live across America, you know, starting on the East Coast at like 5 a.m. or something. And then we'd have a series where we'd just plug in to the morning breakfast talk shows. So each of the anchors of the talk shows had a list of questions that they could ask Max. And as you can imagine, Mac got a little bit bored after about 3 hours of answering the same question. So he'd start ad-libbing. I've got Coca-Cola behind me, I've got HBO behind me, the ABC, and Coca becomes saying, he's not mentioned Coca-Cola in the last two interviews. I mean, it was pure Max. It was so good.
After Max had been on air, I suppose, for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, the car park companies began to replace the Max Headroom signs with Max Height. It must have cost millions.
Even if we wanted to have an ego about it, I think any of us who were canny enough to look around were aware that there was just already a giant Max machine at work that was likely to crush us if we got out of line.
I started reading in these scripts, I'm going, my Lord, these guys are satirizing television network. And all of a sudden I realized why the guy sitting outside the editing room over at the Post Group from Standards and Practices was sweating so much, because he didn't get a chance to see anything before it went on the air, and we were satirizing his bosses. I don't know what kind of fear he had of his own job because of that situation, but it was unique in its conceptual idea.
We basically did our job for ABC. We had our run of 6 that started in the spring. We got a lot of attention, a lot of buzz. ABC began to be perceived in the creative community as a place that might start taking risks. Again, it's before Fox. So that maybe was a network now to go and pitch ideas that were a little bit more innovative.
When I first heard that Max was going to be developed, and by ABC, I probably fell over, fell off the bar stool I was on. It was just an astonishing concept, just for the improbability of it. Even more so, the fact that it actually got on and survived for at least a while.
So when we got renewed, our time slot got moved, and we got moved to 9 o'clock on Friday night opposite Miami Vice and Dallas. So we were toast. Clearly, Max was never going to have a long life. A, the show was expensive, and B, it was never going to be a hit show. I mean, it just had we didn't want to change anything. We didn't want to broaden it. I mean, at one time, I got a phone call from the drama guy at ABC. RoboCop had just come out. And he called me and said, could I develop a RoboCop character within the Max Headroom show that could spin off into its own series in his department? And I just said, no, they're two different genres. So there was no way to broaden the appeal sufficiently. We either went down in flames with head held high, that we remained to the end, or we just tried to dilute it and, perhaps Edison and Theora can really start a romantic relationship. Always looking for things that are more formulaic. And they're not really wrong, it just wasn't right for us, So, of course, I resisted all those things. So we were the sacrificial lamb being put into the death slot, basically. And it was costing a lot of money. So it was really just a matter of how long we could hang on.
Yeah, they cancelled us because we were only getting 12 million. And I remember saying, have you got any idea how many people 12 million people is? But it didn't sell the beans or whatever. And there
It's because 12 million was less than 20 million, which
was then the no. Now 12 million, you'd tear somebody's writing arm off to get anything like such.
And it was interesting that last day. I call it the last day because it was like day 3 of a 7-day episode. And we were on top of a building around Figueroa and 8th in downtown Los Angeles. And we were there for the helicopter pad. They were finishing up the scene, a scene with the computer camera, and they had put it down and turned it around. And I remember there's a shot of me leaning up against the wall, and I'm a full figure about 40 yards away from the camera, and I'm leaning up against the wall at the top of the building, and I was just leaning against it, and I'm on my cell phone. And at the other end of the phone is Peter Wagg.
I'm editing the show, and it's George Coe delivering a speech to his board of directors. And he's just saying, what do the networks know about it anyway? They know nothing, and he's delivering his speech, and I got the call from Brandon Stoddard, just as George Coe's delivering the very same speech. He said, well, you know why I'm calling? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to stop now. I said, okay. That's when I picked up the phone to Brian, to Frankish, who was in the middle of the shoot, who was being filmed while he was answering my call, and I just said, Brian, that's it.
And I remember seeing the shot, because there I am, and I'm talking to Wagg, and I'm getting the call from Wagg saying, we've been canceled. And I'm going, canceled? What does that mean? You're supposed to let everybody know that they don't come to work tomorrow. So I think Craig West was the AD that day, and I turned to him and I says, look, finish the setup and then get everybody up here. Makeup artists, everybody, just bring everybody up. And we brought everybody up, and I turned to everybody and says, I'm terribly sorry, I hate to be the bearer of this news, but we've been canceled by ABC, and I'm instructed by Lorimar that we will not shoot tomorrow. There is no call being issued. There will be no call sheet. There will be no official call for work tomorrow. And our ratings just didn't make it, so I guess we're not going to do this anymore. And it came as a huge shock to everyone. We were a band of brothers, to put it mildly, and brothers and sisters. And I knew that it was going to shock them this way. And in the next block up was the Players Club, an ancient organization in downtown Los Angeles that has its own club and a bar. And I had shot a few commercials up there and been to a few receptions, and I knew of it, so I'd sent the PA up there and said, look, here's my credit card, tell the guy to stay open. And I turned to everybody and says, everybody please join me for a drink afterwards. Right there, that building, you know, put the toys away, load up the trucks, close them down, sign out, and join me for a drink. We must have had 60, 70 people in that bar by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And we all cried. But, you know, that's show business. You know, the cowboys, the wrestlers, the tumblers, the clowns. It's the circus. And we had been a part of something very special, and we all knew it.
Is there a place for Max today? Well, there's a place for anybody that's got something to say.
He seems to be right now for a revival. A few years ago, it still seemed like ahead of its time. It was amazing because I tried to revive it once in the 90s, and it still seemed ahead of its time. But now it seems everything's caught up and everybody can really understand that world, and it's very much part of our world now.
And I think now is as good a time as any, because so much of this stuff is now so relevant and so on, and it's very, very incisive.
Yeah, we may be 18 minutes into the future, so he may still have a little life. Max didn't have the right home in 1987, where he didn't have a chance to prosper, and we didn't have a chance to explore those story possibilities for about 3 or 4 more years.
We've got 30-odd plus stories which just tumble out. You know, getting the stuff together is not difficult. And understanding that Max Headroom is now completes the joke about 20 minutes into the future very nicely, I think. In fact, now he's more urgent, because what he has to say and look at and see now is infinitely more urgent. Max in China, instantly, no trouble at all. He'd be there leading a bloody revolution, or stopping one, whichever, you know, whoever created the story decided. But that's the point. Max is now universal, worldwide. In fact, more than that, Max on Mars, why not? Stick him on a rover. So here's a whole new world that people now understand. I mean, the contemporary generation, I mean, I look like a grey old fart, but I know exactly how the new lot think, because I've always thought that way. And they get this. They get Max over and over again. They can't believe it when they look at it and go, when was this made? So they'd get it, absolutely.
Extraordinary thing is that people actually know about Max Headroom that, you know, hadn't even been born at the time.
Just a year ago, I had an animator, and this kid walks in probably about, I don't know, 28 years old. He's got purple spiky hair, he's got chains hanging from his belt all over the place, and he got on his knees and he started to go, Max Headroom, Max Headroom. And it's just extraordinary.
There are some people that have not heard of Max Headroom, but those are probably the same people that haven't heard of Coca-Cola.
I'd like to think that the legacy of Max is that people look more carefully at their televisions and then turn them off.
I am constantly amazed that people still remember it. For us, it was a wonderful exploratory time. One of those golden moments of which you say, by God, you know, that was the perfect time.
There's some terrific work in it, and it was, as Steve said, almost the opposite of the perfect storm, the perfect English summer afternoon to be able to work on that show. It was terrific to be able to just take these ideas and run with them and see them on, however briefly.
Creatively, it was spectacularly wonderful. And the thing that comes back to me over and over again is amazement that people still remember it, that you guys want to hear about it, that people want to buy the DVDs still. I mean, God bless them. It's wonderful to think that the world has caught up to us.
It was a great project. It was fun to work on something that was ahead of its time and may still be.
It was a moment in time that's never been repeated. There's never been another Max at all. It has become a reference point. Even today, people just go, wow, you were involved in Max Headroom.
There was a harmony of all of us.
That was the great thing about Max. Everybody, right throughout the whole production, was able to do their own thing within the limits of what we could contain.
We were just so passionate and committed, and Brian's passion rippled through the whole production crew, and Steve's rippled through all the writing crew, and I guess mine through the whole crew.
It was a joy. It was a love. And nobody minded the fact that we were all dog-tired and hadn't gotten any sleep. We just loved showing up for work every day.
I truly believe with Max we fulfilled its potential to the max.
Well, where the hell do you come back to, Max? It's easy. You come back to a big glass building somewhere, and downstairs, thousands of floors below, on a plinth, angled like an F-111, is the pink bus. And now you've got Morgan Shepherd in a suit, looking absolutely wonderful, except he's still got all the hair, and he's pissed off. Dominique, of course, is loving this. I mean, she's got her own glass tower. She's absolutely away. But no. Blank Reg, he's looking at the bus thinking, I think I'm going to get the wheels back on the bus. And one night he does. He fills it with all the newest, and here's the key, all the newest stuff he can steal now from his own network. And then he hits the road and he goes to find Edison Carter. And it's apocalypse now. He has to find him up a jungle. Where's Max? Nobody knows where Max is. He hasn't been seen. Well, they find him on Celebrity Squares, number 64, at the bottom right, fast asleep.
Next to
over a
Kate
bottle.
Gosselin.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where it all starts off. And they all get back on the pink bus and they go off and they do Max Headroom again in the year 2011.
And he said it couldn't be pitched.
Yes.